Let me start with a number that might surprise you. After the age of 60, we lose up to 1% of our muscle mass every year, and it's not just about looking strong. This kind of muscle loss, called sarcopenia, is linked to falls frailty, loss of independence, and even earlier mortality. That's the bad news. But the good news, it's not inevitable. Now, here's the myth I want to gently challenge, that preventing muscle loss after 60 is all about protein shakes, pumping iron, and tracking grams of chicken breast. Don't get me wrong. Strength training and protein matter, but in our lab and across a growing number of studies, we've seen a surprising, simple food making a measurable difference in muscle health in older adults. Not a supplement, not a powder, a real whole food, one that most people overlook entirely. I want to walk you through the science behind this, and more importantly, what it means for you or someone you love who's starting to feel that slow loss of strength, balance, or energy. Because here's the larger point: nutrition isn't just about preventing disease. It's about protecting our vitality. It's about staying strong enough to play with grandkids, carry groceries, or walk with confidence into your 80s and beyond. And the tools to do that, they're more accessible than you've been led to believe, especially if we look past the hype and zoom in on the evidence. Over the next several sections, we'll explore 6 key insights drawn from nutrition science, behavioral psychology, and long-term studies on aging and diet. We'll start with what this one food is, and why it has such an outsized effect on muscle. Then we'll unpack how it fits into the bigger picture of insulin resistance, mitochondrial function, gut health, and the surprisingly powerful impact of food quality. Along the way, I'll share studies you can trust, including randomized controlled trials, twin studies, and some fascinating findings from large cohorts of older adults. We'll also ask some reflective questions, not to judge or prescribe, but to help you find what fits you best. And just a quick note on values: when we talk about the best diet, I don't mean the trendiest or most restrictive. I mean the one that works for your health, your ethics, your culture, your joy, and yes, your muscles. So let's dig in. What's the food that could help stop age-related muscle loss in its tracks? And why isn't it being talked about more? So, what's the one food that helps stop muscle loss in older adults? Beans. Yep, humble, affordable, versatile beans. Black beans, chickpeas, lentils, navy beans, you name it. Now, I know, beans don't usually show up in fitness magazines alongside glossy shots of grilled salmon or whey protein tubs. But when we actually look at the mechanisms behind muscle preservation, especially in aging bodies, beans offer a shockingly strong case. Let me explain. First, let's talk amino acids. Beans aren't just carbs, as some critics like to say. They're packed with plant-based protein, and importantly, they provide lysine, an essential amino acid that often runs low in plant-heavy diets. Lysine is critical for collagen synthesis, tissue repair, and yes, building muscle. While beans don't contain as much leucine as animal protein, combining them with other plant foods like whole grains or nuts provides a full amino acid profile that absolutely supports muscle health. But what really makes beans stand out isn't just their protein, it's their fiber and polyphenols. See, muscle health isn't just about feeding the muscle. It's also about reducing chronic inflammation and supporting insulin sensitivity. A 2022 review in Nutrients examined plant-based dietary patterns and sarcopenia risk in older adults. It found that diets rich in legumes, like beans, were associated with lower markers of inflammation like CRP and IL-6 and better glucose metabolism. And when insulin works better, your muscles can absorb and use amino acids more effectively. That's key. Now let's bring in the microbiome. Your gut isn't just digesting food, it's making compounds that affect your muscles. Short-chain fatty acids, ASUFAs, produced when gut bacteria ferment fiber from beans, are anti-inflammatory and help regulate muscle metabolism. In fact, studies in older adults show that a more diverse gut microbiome is linked to stronger grip strength and lower risk of frailty. And beans are one of the most powerful foods to support that diversity. In our lab at Stanford, we've seen this firsthand. In the FIRE study, which focused on fermented and fiber-rich foods, participants who ate more fiber, including from legumes, had increased microbiome diversity and lower levels of 19 inflammatory markers in just 10 weeks. That's an internal environment much more conducive to preserving lean muscle mass. One more layer: potassium and magnesium. Beans are rich in both, and these minerals support muscle contraction, nerve signaling, and intracellular hydration. They also help counteract the acid load of animal-based diets, which can, over time, contribute to calcium loss and muscle breakdown. In fact, a 2020 meta-analysis in clinical nutrition linked higher potassium intake with reduced risk of sarcopenia in older adults. Now, I'm not saying you have to become a vegan. That's not the message. What I'm saying is that adding beans, Even just 1 cup a day can have measurable effects on muscle maintenance. Think of it less like a plant-based shift and more like a muscle-preserving upgrade. And they're not just nutritious, they're practical. Beans are shelf-stable, budget-friendly, and culturally versatile. They work in everything from burritos to curries to pasta sauces. If you're over 60 and trying to stay strong, this isn't just about cutting back on sugar or adding another supplement. It's about rebuilding with real food, and beans are a quiet powerhouse. Here's a reflection to sit with. What if your next step toward preserving strength isn't more protein powder, but a lentil soup? And if this kind of science-backed, practical nutrition resonates with you, no gimmicks, no fads. Hit that subscribe button. It supports this channel and helps us bring you more grounded tools for real health. Let's talk about something that sounds a little less exciting than protein, but might be even more important: insulin resistance. Now, why does that matter for muscle? Because insulin doesn't just manage blood sugar, it's also a powerful anabolic hormone. It tells your body to build things, including muscle tissue. But if your cells stop binding to insulin properly, something that happens more frequent with age and activity and poor diet, your body's ability to synthesize muscle protein is blunted. It's like the construction crew shows up, but the blueprints are missing. Here's the connection. Insulin resistance accelerates sarcopenia. A 2018 study in the Journals of Gerontology followed over 1,000 older adults and found that those with the highest levels of insulin resistance had significantly lower muscle strength and mass, even when controlling for age and BMI. So, improving insulin sensitivity isn't just about preventing type 2 diabetes. It's also about preserving your ability to move, lift, and live independently. Enter beans. Beans are uniquely positioned to help here for a few reasons. First, they have a low glycemic index, which means they release glucose slowly into the bloodstream, reducing blood sugar spikes and keeping insulin more stable. This is critical for older adults where glucose variability is more pronounced, but it gets better. Beans are rich in resistant starch, a form of carbohydrate that resists digestion in the small intestine and feeds beneficial gut bacteria instead, the byproducts of this fermentation process. Particularly butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid, help reduce inflammation and improve insulin sensitivity. A randomized trial in 2019 published in Diabetes Care looked at older adults with insulin resistance. One group added about a cup of legumes per day to their usual diet. After 12 weeks, they had significantly improved OMAR scores, no key marker of insulin sensitivity, reduced fasting glucose, and here's the kicker: maintain more lean muscle mass compared to the control group. This isn't just about theory, it's about outcomes that matter: strength, function, and longevity. You might be wondering, can exercise solve insulin resistance? Absolutely. Movement is critical, but food works with movement, not instead of it. The older we get, the more sensitive we are to the interplay between diet and insulin response. In fact, some research shows that in older adults, resistance training without supportive nutrition doesn't lead to optimal muscle gains. It's like trying to build a house with great tools but no lumber. And there's a behavioral piece too. If you're watching this and thinking, I want to eat better, but I don't want to feel restricted, here's the beauty of beans: they add to your plate. They're not about taking away joy or flavor. They're about creating meals that support metabolic and muscular health simultaneously. A simple shift: add half a cup of black beans to your next rice dish, or mash some white beans into a vegetable soup. These small additions aren't just culinary, they're biochemical nudges in the direction of better insulin sensitivity and muscle preservation. One participant in our studies, a 72-year-old retired teacher, told me she started having lentils with her lunch just to try something new. A year later, she hadn't lost a single pound of muscle on her DIXA scan, a rarity for her age group. I thought I was too old to change my diet, she said. Turns out, my muscles disagreed. So here's a question: where in your week could you swap one ultra-processed starch, say white bread or sugary cereal, for something like beans? Not as a punishment, as an investment in strength you can feel. And if you're into this kind of clear, values-driven nutrition science, I'd love it if you hit subscribe. It's how we keep this channel going and how we keep bringing you practical tools for better aging, one meal at a time. So far we've talked about beans and protein, beans and insulin. Now let's talk about beans and energy. Not just the kind that gets you out of bed in the morning, but the cellular energy your muscles depend on with every step you take. And that starts with something you may not have thought about since high school biology: mitochondria. Your mitochondria are like tiny engines inside every muscle cell. They take the food you eat, carbs, fat, protein, and turn it into usable energy, mainly in the form of ATP. This energy fuels everything from walking upstairs to lifting a grocery bag. But as we age, these engines don't run as well. They get leaky, inefficient, and in some cases start producing more free radicals than energy. This decline in mitochondrial function is a major contributor to age-related muscle loss. It's not just about the amount of protein you eat. It's about whether your cells can use that protein effectively. Here's where beans come in again, in a way you might not expect. Beans are rich in several micronutrients and phytochemicals that directly support mitochondrial health. One of the most important, magnesium, it's a mineral that acts as a cofactor for over 300 enzymatic reactions, including those that produce ATP. When magnesium is low, and studies show that nearly half of older adults fall short, mitochondrial function suffers, muscle cramps increase, fatigue sets in, and muscle preservation becomes harder. A cup of cooked black beans delivers about 120 nmi of magnesium. That's nearly a third of the daily recommended intake for older adults. It's a quiet but powerful way to support your cellular energy systems without reaching for supplements. But that's not all. Beans also contain polyphenols, natural plant compounds with antioxidant properties. One type in particular, flavonoids, has been shown in lab studies to reduce oxidative stress in muscle mitochondria and enhance endurance in older mice. A 2021 study published in Free Radical Biology and Medicine found that older adults with higher intakes of dietary flavonoids had better muscle strength, grip endurance, and walking speed, even when adjusted for physical activity levels. And there's another lesser-known player in iron, especially for post-menopausal women, and maintaining iron levels is crucial. And many types of beans, particularly lentils and white beans, are solid sources of non-Heim iron. Iron is essential for oxygen transport and for the mitochondrial electron transport chain, the very process that converts food into energy. Without it, even well-nourished muscles can feel tired. Now, of course, non-heme iron from plant sources is absorbed less efficiently than from animal foods. But combining beans with a source of vitamin C, say tomatoes or bell peppers, can significantly boost absorption. So if you're making a lentil stew or a bean salad, throw in a handful of fresh greens or citrus. And you're not just cooking, you're optimizing. A participant in one of our studies, a 68-year-old avid Gardner, told us that adding more beans to her meals didn't just improve her digestion, it gave her steady energy she hadn't felt in years. I used to crash after lunch, she said. Now I go straight out to prune the tomatoes. That's mitochondria at work. So here's something to considering. What if your midlife or later life fatigue isn't just about sleep or stress, but about fueling the engines inside your muscle cells with the right raw materials? Beans may not look flashy on a plate, but inside your cells, they're doing some serious work. In the next section, we'll explore how your gut microbiome acts like an internal pharmacy, and how beans play a starring role in producing compounds that protect muscle, reduce inflammation, and even influence mood. Here's a question you might not expect in a talk about muscle: how healthy is your gut? Now, I get it. Gut health tends to get lumped in with trendy cleanses or probiotic ads. But in the last 10 years, the science on the gut-muscle connection has taken a big leap forward. And what it tells us is this: the microbes living in your intestines, trillions of them, play a direct role in how well you maintain muscle as you age. Think of your gut like a dense rainforest. The more diverse and resilient it is, the more it can do, from digesting fiber to producing anti-inflammatory compounds. But if that rainforest gets depleted, say, from a low-fiber, ultra-processed diet, it becomes less effective. Inflammation rises, nutrient absorption drops, and muscle tissue quietly pays the price. So what do these microbes actually do for your muscles? First, they produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, acetate, and propionate. These compounds aren't just good for your colon. They travel throughout your body, reducing systemic inflammation, improving insulin sensitivity, and even influencing gene expression in muscle tissue. A study published in Cell Host Iron Microbe in 2020 showed that higher levels of butyrate-producing bacteria were linked to greater muscle mass and function in older adults. The same study found that individuals with more diverse gut microbiomes walked faster, stood up from chairs more easily, and had better balance. These aren't abstract metrics. These are indicators of independence, safety, and quality of life. And what's one of the best ways to increase butyrate in your gut? Beans. Beans are packed with fermentable fiber, the kind your microbes love to digest. This isn't the same as fiber supplements or bran flakes. We're talking about whole food matrix fiber, complex and slow digesting and packaged with micronutrients and polyphenols. In our fiery study at Stanford, participants who increased their intake of fiber-rich foods like legumes saw a significant rise in microbiome diversity and a decrease in 19 markers of inflammation in just 10 weeks. These weren't people on extreme diets, just folks who added more beans, vegetables, and fermented foods into their routines. It's not magic, it's biochemistry and behavioral science. One thing that makes beans so effective is that they're habit forming in the right direction. Unlike processed foods engineered to hijack cravings, beans have a slow burn. They leave you satisfied longer, help regulate appetite, and create internal conditions that support better food decisions the next time around. There's also an emerging area of research linking the microbiome to mood and motivation, particularly in older adults. A healthier gut can help regulate serotonin, dampen stress responses, and even improve motivation for physical activity. So yes, your bin chili might just help you feel more like taking that walk tomorrow. One participant in our community nutrition workshops, a 75-year-old man with type 2 diabetes, started making black bean tacos twice a week. I didn't expect anything, he told us, but I feel more stable. Like, I'm not chasing my blood sugar all day. That kind of steadiness, that's the microbiome working behind the scenes. So here's your reflection. What's one meal this week where you could swap in beans? Not as a health chore, but as a gift to your gut. And if you're enjoying this thoughtful, evidence-based journey through food and aging, I'd be honored if you subscribed. It tells the algorithm and us that there's an audience for nutrition content that respects both science and humanity. So far, we've looked at how beans support muscle health through protein, insulin regulation, mitochondrial support, and gut microbiome function. But if we really want to understand their power, we need to step back and ask a bigger question. What kind of diet are beans a part of? Because individual foods matter. But what matters even more is dietary pattern. It's the daily rhythm of what we eat over weeks and years that shapes our health. Think of it like music. A single note might be lovely, but it's the pattern, the melody, the harmony, that moves you. So let's look at the patterns. In the blue zones, regions of the world where people live the longest, healthiest lives, beans are a constant. Whether it's lentils in Ikaria, black beans in Nicoya, or Azuki beans in Okinawa, legumes are eaten nearly daily. And it's not just tradition, it's physiology. Researchers studying these communities found that diets rich in legumes were associated with better grip strength, slower declines in walking speed, and even lower rates of frailty and disability with age. And here's the part that always fascinates Meg. These diets aren't high protein in the way we talk about it at Western health circles. They're high in plant diversity, moderate in protein, and rich in fiber, phytochemicals, and micronutrients. Beans are a centerpiece, not because they're trendy, but because they work. Now let's bring this closer to home. In the Diabetes study, our large randomized controlled trial at Stanford, we didn't tell people to go low carb or low fat blindly. We encouraged them to focus on high quality and minimally processed foods. And across both diet groups, the participants who did best, who lost the most fat and preserved the most muscle, weren't those who obsessed over macronutrients. They were the ones who prioritized whole foods, including legumes. That's an important reframe. It's not just about what to cut out. It's about what to crowd in. Beans are a powerful example of stealth nutrition. They're not marketed like protein bars or sold in flashy packaging, but they show up quietly in some of the most protective dietary patterns on the planet. The Mediterranean diet, traditional Asian and Latin American diets, vegetarian diets, flexitarian diets, diets based on affordability, sustainability, and cultural joy, and they fit all of them. Why does this matter for muscle? Because long-term muscle health isn't just built in the gym or from isolated grams of leucine. It's built by consistency. And people are far more likely to stick with dietary patterns that are flexible, satisfying, and aligned with their values. That's why I often ask patients and participants not, what's the best diet? But what's the best diet for you that you can enjoy, afford, and sustain? For many people, beans are a brilliant anchor food. They're filling, adaptable, and pair well with so many other nutritious ingredients. Whole grains, vegetables, herbs, nuts, and even modest portions of animal protein. You don't need to overhaul your diet. You just need to start weaving in more plants more often, and beans make that easy. One woman in our long-term aging study, an 82-year-old who lives alone, told us she makes a big pot of lentil stew every Sunday. It saves me time, tastes better by Tuesday, and I know I'm eating something that helps me stay strong. That's not a meal plan, that's a life pattern. So here's a gentle prompting. What does your weekly food pattern sound like right now? Is it rushed and chaotic or steady and nourishing? And where could a little more rhythm, like a weekly bin dish, help create health by default? Now, we'll bring it all together with a look at behavioral momentum. How small, Plant-forward changes like eating more beans can spark bigger improvements in strength, motivation, and metabolic health over time. Let's say you decide to start eating beans more often. You swap your lunchtime sandwich for a lentil salad twice a week. Maybe you simmer a black beans on Sunday and use it through the week in soups, in tacos, maybe even stirred into scrambled eggs. It's a simple change. But what happens next might surprise you, because this isn't just about protein or fiber or even insulin sensitivity. What we're really talking about now is behavioral momentum. The idea that small, positive changes often lead to bigger, sustained improvements over time. It's a concept borrowed from behavioral psychology, and it applies beautifully to food and health. You start with one change, let's say beans, and that new pattern disrupts old defaults. Suddenly, you're fuller longer, so you snack less. You feel steadier in the afternoon, so maybe you walk a bit more. You start getting curious about other fiber-rich foods. You experiment with plant-based meals. You sleep a little better, your digestion improves, and slowly your identity starts to shift. You're not someone trying to eat better. You're someone who eats beans and walks after lunch. That might sound small, but identity drives consistency, and consistency drives results. There's a great quote from BJ Fogg, a behavioral scientist at Stanford, saying, "You change best by feeling good." When a small shift like eating more beans leads to better energy, fewer blood sugar crashes, and a feeling of control, you want to keep going. And that's the opposite of what most diets feel like. Restrictive plans often start big and fizzle fast, but sustainable changes start small and build. This is what we see in long-term nutrition studies over and over again. It's not the people who overhaul everything overnight who succeed. It's the ones who find what fits. Culturally, emotionally, logistically, that's why something like beans can be so powerful. They don't require perfection, just a little planning and a little creativity. And the best part, this kind of momentum isn't just physical, it's psychological. In our community trials, we often hear things like, "I didn't think I could eat healthy without cutting out everything I love. But this feels doable. I didn't know beans could be comforting. Now they're my go-to. I started eating better for my muscles, but I stuck with it for my mood." That's a huge insight, because it's not willpower that sustains long-term change, it's positive feedback loops. The more your food choices support how you want to feel, strong, steady, alive, the more those choices reinforce themselves. And this is where values come in. If you care about sustainability, beans are among the most environmentally friendly sources of protein on the planet. If you care about equity, they're affordable and accessible. No fancy powders or exotic imports required. If you care about tradition, there's likely a bean dish in your cultural heritage that nourished generations before you. That makes this not just a food, but a symbol. A reminder that health doesn't have to be high-tech or high-budget. It can be humble, hearty, and human. So here's a final reflection before we close. What's one small change you could commit to this week that feels energizing, not depleting? Something that adds nourishment, not just subtracts bad foods. Maybe it's a bean salad. Maybe it's batch cooking chili. Maybe it's learning your grandmother's lentil stew. Start there. Let that one choice build momentum. Not just in your muscles, but in your confidence. So let's take a breath and step back. We've covered a lot. We started with the quiet powerhouse of a food, beans, and followed the trail through muscle biology, metabolism, gut health, mitochondria, and the psychology of sustained change. We saw how beans provide protein and lysine that support muscle repair and preservation. Their fiber and resistant starch improve insulin sensitivity, which is crucial for muscle growth and maintenance. They're rich in magnesium, iron, and polyphenols that fuel our cellular engines. The mitochondria to keep energy levels up. They nourish the gut microbiome, leading to anti-inflammatory effects and better muscle signaling. They anchor dietary patterns that support longevity, strength, and joy across cultures and generations. And perhaps most powerfully, they create behavioral momentum. Small shifts that ripple outward into bigger, lasting health changes. But this isn't really a story about beans. It's a story about possibility, about what's still possible after 60, 70, or even 80, about how we can keep our strength, not just with exercise or supplements, but through real food that supports the whole system of aging well. And it's also a story about values, because when you choose a food that nourishes you and aligns with your ethics, your budget, and your culture, that's a sustainable chew, not just for your body, but for your life. There's a quiet power in that. You don't need to follow the latest diet trend. You don't need to chase protein grams or track every bite. You just need to ask better questions. What helps me feel strong, not just physically, but emotionally? What foods can I turn to again and again that nourish, satisfy, and support who I want to be? So here's your invitation. Try one plant-forward meal this week built around beans. Not as a cleanse, not as a challenge, just as an experiment in feeling good. Grounded, nourished, steady. It could be a lentil stew, a bean and veggie stir fry, even just canned black beans tossed into your usual lunch. Keep it simple. Keep it joyful. Then notice, not just how you feel that day, but how it shapes the rest of your week. And if this kind of science-backed, values-centered approach to nutrition speaks to you, I'd love to invite you to be part of this community. Like the video if it resonated, share a comment. What's your favorite bean dish, or what change are you inspired to make? Subscribe if you haven't already. We're building something thoughtful here, a space where science meets sanity and food becomes a tool for strength, dignity, and vitality, no matter your age. Thanks for being here. Truly,